100 years ago, well-dressed men rode carriages through the quaint cobblestone streets that wind through the city of Palermo, Sicily, and converge on its ancient town square. Many of these well-dressed men belonged to the Mafia, otherwise known as the Honored Society, a criminal brotherhood that used codes of honor, millions of lira, and above all, violence to control every aspect of daily life throughout Sicily. These so-called men of respect had been a law unto themselves for centuries. So it's no surprise that Palermo has been the birthplace of many powerful mafia bosses. On August 24th, 1902, a boy was born who one day would build the most powerful crime syndicate in the world. His name was Carlo Gambino. Carlo was born into a prosperous and well-connected family. Many of his relatives were in the Mafia. Carlo grew up sheltered by the Mafia in a part of the city so dominated by the Honored Society that it was off limits even to police and the military. Like others his age, young Carlo looked up to his Mafia elders. The men of respect had everything a man could want: power and money. They were treated like royalty. As a teenager, Carlo watched them stroll along the streets of the city in their beautifully tailored suits.
All the men would take off their hats to them, doff their hats, and the women would curtsy and kiss their hands. And he said, "My God, how can you get to be one of these guys?"
The man who made the biggest impression on young Carlo was the head of the Honored Society and one of the most powerful men in Sicily, Don Vito Cascioferro. Don Vito was both charismatic and fearless, but it was his criminal intuition that Carlo idolized most. Don Vito perfected the art of extortion. Where earlier mafiosi had pillaged and destroyed the businesses who would not cooperate with them, Don Vito saw a greater opportunity. In charging moderate fees for mafia protection, the businessmen could operate without fear, so long as they paid Don Vito his share. The energetic and ambitious Carlo wanted to be part of the action. He dropped out of school as a teenager and, with the help of his family's connections, got a job as an enforcer for Don Vito. If a businessman failed to pay his protection money on time, Carlo would arrange an accident. For a young criminal, Carlo's looks were hardly threatening. He was only 5'7", of average build, and he did not parade around in fancy suits. His only intimidating feature was his prominent nose, which looked like a hawk's beak. He also had a mischievous grin which became his trademark. Carlo was shy and reserved, yet he lived by a creed which would take him to the top of a criminal empire.
One of the great lines that he uttered was, you have to be like a lion and a fox. The fox is smart enough to recognize traps, and the lion is strong enough to scare away the wolves. Be like a lion and a fox, and, no one will ever beat you.
Carlo proved to Don Vito and other men of respect that he was both a lion and a fox, carrying out all their orders with ruthlessness and cunning.
They immediately recognized in Carlo a superior intelligence. He was known as a man of great shrewdness from an early age. It's a quality in Italy which they call furberia, shrewdness, the kind of intelligence needed to pull off major crimes.
At the age of 19, Carlo's hard work and efforts were rewarded with a formal induction into the Honored Society. His boyhood dream come true. But now, events outside Palermo would begin to shape his life. In the early 1920s, fascism was gaining popularity throughout Italy. Its leader, Benito Mussolini, had little tolerance for the Honored Society. One of his objectives? To destroy the Mafia.
So a lot of young mafiosi thought that there's no future here. They'll end up in jail, and if they had any connections in America, they used them.
And Carlo had plenty of them. Part of his mother's family, the Castellanos, a powerful mafia clan, had already moved to New York. With his future at home in jeopardy, he set his sights on America, where his New York relatives could introduce him to a criminal life full of golden opportunities. So, on a November day in 1921, the young Carlo was smuggled aboard a freighter bound for America. His family had paid the captain a substantial sum to escort the privileged young man across the Atlantic. A month later, the ship pulled into Norfolk, Virginia, with a cargo of wine, anchovies, and olives. Dressed in his Sunday best, one lone passenger slowly emerged. Carlo Gambino, all of 19 years old, had arrived.
And he strutted off as if he owned the world, and he was met by his Castellano relatives who whisked him up to New York. He made him a spectacular entry into the United States. You know, it wasn't some scruffy little mobster. He was treated as a prince.
A prince with princely ambitions, and he would let nothing and no one stand in his way. Just before Christmas 1921, the teenaged Carlo Gambino set foot on American soil and began moving up the mafia ladder of success the old-fashioned way, through hard work and violence.